Betsy Ann Thomas here for the American Intelligence Media, and today we have Michael McKibben joining us in the conclave, but actually we're not in the conclave because this is the day before the election and we are running at warp speed. Thank you, Scotty McKibben, for giving us the extra juice that we need in this engine.
Well, you're welcome. After hearing your video yesterday, I had to get a flamethrower out of my phone.
Yes, because I am very upset with, and I'm going to make this statement, then I want you guys to beat it up and tell me where I'm wrong. Looks to me that the central problem in our government right now is that our Supreme Court is not doing its job. And let me be very specific. Douglas, you said something about John Roberts and these FISA courts. He supervises these FISA courts, and he is the one who's permitted this rogue FISA court system to operate. And this is the system which was working to overthrow Donald Trump along with a corrupt FBI with tentacles that go all the way back to the Queen. And I know you guys get so upset when I keep pointing out the Queen, but in the end, we never won the American Revolution, and I'm sick and tired of it, and I want this thing to be cleaned up, and it looks to me like the point guy is Justice Roberts, and the system we need to look at are the courts.
Amen, Sister Betsy. That's the reason we follow your lead. We do need to show that the fake justice system is so rigged that when you go before a judge, you can already determine what the outcome is going to be because of their partisan approach.
Douglas, walk me through the reason why Justice Roberts is in charge of the FISA courts and what that means. Explain that to the listeners.
Well, I think Michael could do a better job of that. Anything to do with the court systems, once you've suffered enough in them, you have learned the system through the suffering. And yes, the FISA court is the highest court that there is in terms of intelligence, and it's supposed to be super secret, and it is ruled by, of course, the higher judges above it, and likewise all the way to the top, all the way to the Supreme Chief of the Supreme Court. Anyway,
the SES. I mean, it's pretty obvious it's the SES.
Oh, good point. He is the chief of the SES. Michael, take it from there because you can explain it much better.
Well, I'm digging out of my memory banks now because my issues with Chief Justice Roberts go back to our Leader v. Facebook case, and the fact that when our case came before him to decide whether they were going to hear our writ of certiorari, our petition, he declined, and then we learned subsequently that he held mountains of Facebook financial interests and had no business getting even close to making a decision related to our case. And so I got a personal issue with him. He didn't do his job as an attorney, as a judge, and he completely violated the conflict of interest laws that he says he's bound by. So that's just for starters. It got much worse after that. And I'm related to the FISA court, we only tangentially focused on that in our research, but if my memory serves me correctly, at the end of 2008, just before Obama came into office, the Department of Justice wrote a bunch of new regulations coming out of the Patriot Act. Yeah, it was the Patriot Act, and it specifically had to do with how the Attorney General could order surveillance on Americans. And that particular rule that was created right then, right before Obama came in, specifically said that he, at that time, was going to be, Eric Holder, was solely accountable to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court related to permissions to engage in illegal surveillance of Americans based on the sole decision of the Attorney General. So what bothered me at the time, and of course it wasn't related to our case, but here we had a new rule coming out of the Patriot Act that allowed the Attorney General pretty much dictatorial decision-making power over the FISA court to engage in illegal surveillance of Americans. And the only accountability that he had, he being the incoming Eric Holder was he was accountable to Chief Justice John Roberts. And so the entire FISA court reported to one man. And, of course, we now know that if you want corruption in any form of government, you have all you need to do is instill one level of accountability, and then you're going to open up a whole Pandora's box of corruption, which now we have seen. So that particular rule seems to have opened Pandora's box for the abuses of the FISA court and the lack of accountability throughout our justice system and our Department of Justice and our FBI.
Well, he needs to be thrown off the court. How do you go about doing that? What do citizens need to do to right the wrong that's happening right there on the Supreme Court? And, you know, when I look at your timeline, which I lovingly call the crime line, because it's 18 years worth of research of judicially recognized evidence that anybody in the world can use against this cabal of criminals, there's got to be other judges that are as equally corrupt as Roberts.
I would say the whole FISA court. I mean, these judges are all turning a blind eye to their responsibilities. And of course, they can slough it off to the excuse is, well, John Roberts didn't deny this capability, therefore it was a default decision. But as we now know, because the FBI knew that the FISA court was going to be a rubber stamp, they stopped even asking for the rubber stamp. They just started doing it, and nobody has held them accountable because the Patriot Act allows singular responsibility focused on the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
You're so right, Michael, because Michael Rogers, Admiral Rogers, from the NSA, asked for an audit in the spring of 2016 on the FISA court. Why did he ask for an audit? Because of the abuse of Obama telling all 17 intelligence agencies that they can take raw NSA data and access it by a single sign-on. In other words, unmasking. So unmasking was happening on such a fantastic level that he demanded there be an audit. But that audit was so embarrassing because there was already an Inspector General audit going on the FISA court. Well, it turned up in, I believe, December of 2016, that basically they were in 100% noncompliance, both the CIA and the FBI. As a matter of fact, the CIA had, in some cases, in its downline, swept up hundreds of millions of other people that were in the downline, 2 layers down from the people that they were surveilling, who were slightly connected to foreign countries. And so that was brought forth, and it said that the CIA needed to change dramatically because they were in 100% noncompliance. It was just pathetic. The numbers we put out in our intelligence reports show that they were surveilling everyone, as you pointed out. But the FBI, in that Inspector General report of 2016, said that they never once pulled a single warrant. That Comey was in such noncompliance that he literally had never once complied with the law. And he was surveilling every single American and never pulled a single, not one FISA court warrant. And the 702 Title I FISA court warrant that he pulled on Carter Page was long after Carter Page, literally practically a year after Carter Page was not even associated with the Trump campaign, and he was only slightly associated with it. And so they get this FISA court warrant, renew it 4 times so that they can spy on the Trump team, and that's the only single one that is done during the time of the Inspector General audit. In other words, in October of 2016, when they got the fake FISA court warrant through the FBI Counterintelligence Department, Title I, which means that Comey had to sign off that he was 100% sure that Carter Page was a Russian spy. And then they renewed it 4 times. But they only put in the application, there was no hearing. And then Judge Contreras, who was one of the judges that sat as a FISA court judge to hear, to take those applications, then was impaneled in the grand jury against Paul Manafort, and later had to be recused from above and told to get off the grand jury because he had a conflict of interest because of his FISA court connections. Well, then why didn't. The Supreme Court simply closed down the FISA court, seeing that they were in non-compliance both domestically and internationally, because it's completely corrupt from the get-go. That's the point. They knew it was corrupt, and that's why we are the only ones who have said, we are not worried. We don't think that they actually did anything with that FISA court warrant for Carter Page. And in fact, they didn't. They simply applied for it 4 times. They had no hearing. We said it was the national security letters written and signed off by Comey, written by Peter Strzok, that were really the motivating force for the surveillance and for the unmasking. And so you can see that from the top, it is so corrupt that if there was any judge in the line of the FISA court that witnessed any of this that did not immediately cease the FISA court, they should just be kicked out of the court system.
Basically, you're talking about a coup d'etat, and the Supreme Court is as much complicit as all these other characters we've been naming.
Yeah, that would be true.
Yeah, let me read you some of, in 2012, Judge Roberts submitted his financial holdings. Let me just read you some of the names and see if you recognize them of his primary investments. AOL, BlackRock, Dell, many funds of Fidelity, Hewitt-Packard, Freddie Mac, Hill-Rom Holdings. Now, you may not know who that is, but that's Hill-Rom is a company in Indiana that does 2 things. They make hospital beds and coffins. Now, continue. Janus, Microsoft, Nokia, Putnam, T. Rowe Price, Texas Instrument, Time Warner, and Vanguard, and Wells Fargo, just to name a few. Most people are going to say, well, those are ones I might be in too, but if a company or a litigant comes before you that personally benefits from those investments that he has a duty to recuse himself, and he didn't do that. In our case, or in many other cases that have come before him, related to trying to overturn the bogus America Invents Act. That
well, not to mention all these accounts that you have mentioned. Plus, we're looking at all these offshore accounts by these criminals. That it's all woven together. So he's not going to call out anything like this, because in doing so, he's calling out his corrupt criminal sins.
Well, the point here is he had inside information that these were the ones he should be invested in.
Exactly, and you wonder how much he made off of Facebook, you know?
So they rigged in 2001, they changed the ethics laws. They scrambled the ethics laws to make it an open question whether you had to disclose the holdings within these funds. And their practice has been uniformly 100% that they don't have to, even though it was a question at the time. But because neither he nor any of his lower judges have responded to any criticism of these holdings, everybody's getting away with it.
And it shows their conflict of interest. It shows what really motivates them. It shows that anytime that there's a problem with the courts, they simply ignore it. Anytime that the courts get a conflict like Judge Leon is concerned with they just replace judges. So they put Judge Leon into a case to make sure that John Podesta doesn't get prosecuted. They put Judge Chutkan in as a replacement for another judge so that Imran Awan doesn't get prosecuted. I mean, they interrupt court cases from above, replace judges, and make them recuse themselves, and the judge may not even know why they're being recused. But when they need to recuse themselves or show their conflict of interest, oh no, total blind eye, like Lisa Barsumian. How many times does she have to represent the criminal element of Washington, D.C. before we realize that she definitely has a conflict of interest with her husband, Rat Rodenstein, who is now trying to prosecute those very people and defend others? Again, defending the Clintons by creating a false prosecution of Trump and trying to cover up for the Clintons. Same thing Lisa Barsumian's been doing how many times? Dozens of times. So we get to see the corrupt, fake justice system. John Roberts is a perfect example of it. He's gotten rich off of these IPOs that he knew he had insider trading information for, Facebook and others. And we get to see that from above, he changes judges When he doesn't like the way that a court is going, he simply replaces that judge against their will if necessary.
A specific example that's being researched today, and that involves the state of Florida, and who the companies that provide the IT services, information technology services in Florida. And it appears that the master contract for information technology in Florida is held by Microsoft, and they subcontract out to other players. So the fact that Chief Justice Roberts has Microsoft stock, and the fact that Microsoft is running the information technology systems in Florida that the election system relies upon, is a major problem in regard to a conflict of interest and should be addressed.
Well, I'd like to know what Mike Pence is doing with all this. He was put in charge for examining this election rigging stuff, and Christopher Strunk also gave him a copy of this writ. Now, there are a lot of people that question what team Pence is playing on. I'm not saying one way or the other, but his action is going to show me personally a lot.
Absolutely, Betsy.
Yeah, it's so easy. It's so easy to feign ignorance with these technical issues with these politicians, and we got to get past that. If they don't have the expertise, they get it, and then they act rather than just be these soft little Pillsbury doughboys that just sort of giggle when you punch at them.
Yes, there is deep election rigging and meddling in the United States elections, and you point to it, Michael. Your team points to it exactly where it's occurring. How can they ignore this anymore?
James Miller actually submitted real evidence in his writ in state of Washington. So there's no question the evidence is overwhelming, right? Everybody that got this has a duty as a public official to act upon it and not just ignore it.
Planned long before we met. Can you kind of outline that for folks?
Yes, this is an idea that was hatched by our shareholders who have been uniformly damaged by the theft of our social networking technology by the federal government and our claims for compensation, which is the short name is the Miller Act notice, that our company and all of our shareholders, or many of our shareholders, have submitted to the White House for payment. And in that, it's a lot of money because it's basically saying the entire social media technology sphere was founded on the theft of our technology. So if you look at the total value of social networking and related telecommunication services on the planet, that number is known. It's somewhere between $4 and $6 trillion. Now, what we started doing was breaking that apart and saying, well, that's a big number for a government of any size to pay. And so our shareholders broke it down into two sections. And the bottom line is, I stand to benefit quite a bit from this Miller Act payment. What I'm willing to do with most of my payout is to turn that over to the development of a truly free press that's not beholden to corporate America and these tech left interests, which then skew all of the independent research that investigative journalists should be doing. And by that, we can start financing, I think, more what the founders intended for a truly free press and a fourth column estate, or the fifth estate, I can't remember. But anyway, to be able to take that cash and turn it into a truly free press, that's what we need, and that's what we've proposed.
And imagine that Chief Justice John Roberts looks at the Fourth Estate, the mainstream media, sees the corruption, does nothing, looks at the theft of patents of Americans, and does much more than nothing. He allows it to go to the British company Serco, and for our IP to the tune of trillions and trillions of dollars.
That is utterly scandalous. I mean, we talk about it so matter-of-factly now. Think about it. It's utterly scandalous that we're turning our creativity of our real American inventors over to the British. For God's sakes, let's get on with getting this fixed.
It's so pathetic. You know, the Lady Justice has got a blind around her eyes. Well, John Roberts has a blind around his eyes, and the only thing he can see is dollar signs going into his offshore accounts from the globalists. These people didn't go onto the Supreme Court just because they thought that it's a nice title to have or because they got paid a lot of money. They are paid diddly squat compared to what any lawyer worth their salt would be paid outside of that job. So why do they do it? If you don't think they're being paid off, you're just mistaken. They're completely partisan. We know what their opinion's going to be. They don't even need to show up. We know what their opinion is going to be. The vote is cast by the political party who put them in their position. So why do we play this game? Why? I think what we need to do is, instead of having the scales there that Lady Justice is holding, we need to take the blindfold off Lady Justice. We need for her.
We slap it with a British crest.
Put the British crown on top of the Lady Justice's head.
Exactly.
Let's not forget that our British brothers and sisters, the patriots in Britain, started this movement because they were brave enough to step up and Brexit. And we owe them that, because that was right at the time where Trump was getting a lot of momentum in our own patriot movement. So when we talk about the Brits and the negative way we do, we never mention are focusing our energy on the patriots there. We salute you. But if we do not overthrow the British monarch and its tentacles in America, we will not be able to overcome the globalists that rule our planet and have for centuries. This is a world awakening. All of us need to start protecting our borders and our language, our cultures, who we are as people. We need to be a world of diversity of countries and nations.
Yes, as I have said a number of times in various interviews with you, it pains me to have to talk about the British this way, because I lived there for 6 years. I have many dear friends there, and they are very godly people, the ones I know, and I'm sure are as appalled as any of us are at what's going on in their country. So you're right. We're not talking about the average Brit who's a God-fearing, honest person who is trying to live their honest lives. This is about the system that they were born into.
And our Supreme Court needs to stop writing law. They need to start interpreting law. And there's only the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Bill of Rights that they should be referring to, and not a bunch of liberal, progressive, sink to the lowest common denominator type thinking, because that's what John Roberts actually represents now. He did whatever Obama told him to do. Oh, sure, you want to tax them for Obamacare? No problem. Oh, it's a tax, not a tax. It's whatever you call it. This is nonsense. You're supposed to have blind justice, and the sword is supposed to chop off the head of anybody messing with that scale that she's holding. No, that's not what's happening. What's really happening is the Chief Justice, he has the blind off, and he's watching to see if pay to play, if he gets paid the right amount on the scale for the decision that he's making. And if you don't pay him, he'll use the sword on you. And just like
we have allowed our courts to make bad decisions for so long now that those bad decisions are now being used as precedent in more current cases, and that's where the problem lies. And what we've got to do is get back to a rule of law, and these layers of bogus precedent need to be wiped away, because they make no sense. They're not practical. They are not reasonable. And yet these lawyers and judges, they use the bad precedent for future precedent to the point where this idea of a dynamic constitution is being used to justify complete lawlessness. And I can give you some specific examples in the state of California right now where a judge is actually dismissing a case against some of the tech left before the tech left has even, as defendants, responded to the complaint. He is trying to dismiss it. His name is Judge Davila, and he seems to be their henchman out there in California.
Well, he was told what the judgment was going to be, and he just went ahead and did it before the case started. I mean, it's not really that really that different than what they usually do. It's just he got a little excited.
She filed the case, and he dismissed it on behalf of the defendants. I mean, that's utterly lawless.
Well, let's look at the chief Supreme Court justices, okay? Who do they think they are? Monarchy? How could they be appointed for life? That's just plain stupid. They're going to keep the same agreement to whoever appointed them for the rest of the time they're on that bench.
Wait, Douglas, the reason they're for life is that way they can judge without the pressures, the political pressures, and they can be more fair. That's the argument.
Yeah, and as we know, that isn't the way that it works, of course. And they have a position that they shouldn't be given, and it is a position that should be elected. And I believe there should be no federal judges at all, really. And if there are a few, let them be in D.C. and let them be elected. And let them be elected based upon whether or not they have any merit and whether or not their decisions were in alignment with the truth. And instead of the U.S. Patriot Act, which basically throws the Constitution, the U.S. Bill of Rights into the toilet and flushes it, that law, which was changed to the U.S. Freedom Act afterwards by Obama, it's the deprecation of American freedoms. It couldn't be any worse. And if there's a Supreme Court justice that sits on that bench that believes in the U.S. Patriot Act or the U.S. Freedom Act, that should disbar them right there, because it goes directly against the U.S. Constitution. You have no freedoms if you are suspected of being a terrorist or knowing a terrorist. All of your assets can be seized. You can be moved out of this country to Gitmo with no representation for the rest of your life. That's what is in store for every American who wants to be accused by the federal government for being a terrorist or having anything to do with a terrorist.
It's now evident that terrorism was created by this group to become a perennial enemy so that they could label anyone as suspected terrorists and therefore surveil us all. Very clever logic, but completely immoral.
Robert Mueller invented that, and John Brennan came in as the first person appointed for counterterrorism in this country, who then said that radical Islamic fascism did not exist. And Robert Mueller focused everything on terrorism for this imaginary terrorist group, Al-Qaeda, which was in fact funded by Donald Rumsfeld. I mean, we created Al-Qaeda, we created ISIS, we created ISIL, we created
That's just outrageous. I had a nephew that risked his life on 2 tours in Iraq.
It's disgusting.
And he was one of the bodyguard of the general of the 4th ID Infantry Division, and he was in many battles and was even bombed and rocketed. And it just incenses me to hear that we're fighting our own government.
Oh, and more outrageous is that the Gulf of Tonkin set the Vietnam War. And we also, the 3 of us, are of that age where we lost many friends because of this war that did nothing but feed the warlord, banker, globalists of the world. And people of the world, we need to call this out as what it is. They are feeding on the rest of humanity. We need to off-world them. If they've got a space program going, we need to haul them all up and send them away.
Well, the Democrats are criminals because they're supporting the criminals coming across our southern border. And when you think about that, then what we need to do is, as Trump is doing, not only calling out the National Guard, but our own military, the 101st Airborne Fort Bragg Readiness Group. Why?
Wasn't that weren't you in the 101st?
Yeah. And why does he do that? Because we actually have an invasion going on. But here's the other invasion. Washington, D.C., senior executive service members are at all levels running all things in the federal agencies, including the military, and also the Supreme Court. There are SES members upon the Supreme Court who thought that they're so important that they needed to be paid more than any other civil servant.
Excuse me, John Roberts is SES.
I was going to
say
that.
He was SES as Solicitor General.
But I was going to spit after I said his name. John Roberts is SES.
And so is Kavanaugh, so it's going to be interesting to see how he rules on all of that.
Well, there have been a few people that seem to have bucked the SES, like Dinesh D'Souza and others. So we're not going to paint them all with the same brush. But the facts are the facts. And it's clear that our Supreme Court justice is covering for that Department of Justice 500 that handles all the compensation for the SES 10,000 members. And he's obviously as guilty as sin. So the question is, what's he going to do going forward? And Betsy asked, how do you get rid of him? Well, right now, the only way to get rid of a judge is impeachment. So that'll consume a lot of cycles in Congress, and that's why so many congressmen, one of the reasons they don't want to do that. It takes too much time away from other things.
And anyway, impeach them for what? They don't do anything. Their clerks do all the work. Ruth hasn't been awake during a meeting at the Supreme Court for years. There are others who nod off. There are others who have epileptic seizures and are on their drugs and they're so medicated they don't know what's going on. There's others who are on other medications and or are just asleep at the wheel. So what we have here is basically a criminal, fake justice system from the Supreme Court and the federal appellate courts, the appeal courts, and the federal circuit courts. I say get rid of all of them. There's no need for any of them. And I don't believe in appointed judges, period. No, all judges should be elected by the very community that looks upon their decisions and judges them for being either part of the law or not, because the lawlessness of our law enforcement agencies, of the Department of Justice, the FBI, so on and so forth, they are not enforcing the law. They are committing crimes, covering up for their crimes. They don't have time to go after anybody who's actually committing crime, because if they did, they'd have to arrest those 500 DOJ SES lawyers, first thing, absolutely the first thing, and all SES members, especially those who are have been working for any length of time appointed by Obama as the resistance. And if you look at their work, you'd find most of these people do no work except to resist and to make sure that the bureaucratic status quo remains the same.
They get to their tea time by 2 in the afternoon. Come on.
They have a nice union, and they have picnics and parties, and they get awards every single year. They get, $20,000 awards, $25,000, $35,000.
And they get an inn of court named after them.
Oh, yes, they do.
Pretty good deal.
And they really don't have to do any work because they shift between the different agencies now, according to Obama's new rules concerning the SES. And they, every short period of time, they shift to a new agency, so they don't know what they're doing, but they're the bosses. They can't be fired. They get all the bonuses. And if you do not support them, that they get their bonus, then they, of course, write you up. So you must support all SES members, senior management, in whatever federal agency you're in, or you just get annihilated as a civil servant. SES controls the civil servants. And it's a sick system working from the top down, elitist as usual, globalist as usual, and we need to use our own military against them, and we need to
It's our version of the Privy Council.
That's exactly right. We need to show them out. Privy Council's legal in Britain. It ain't legal in America. And so Hillary Clinton's digital Privy Council, you're all on notice. And I'm glad you've moved, many of you, to China, because that's going to be about the only place you're going to be safe from American patriots who know what you've done and are coming after you. You too, John Roberts. So if you do not take this writ of mandamus that Christopher Strunk has submitted and bring it to the attention of the proper people, because this is a national security issue, our elections have been rigged, and they're being rigged as we speak, and we've told you how and why. If you do nothing about it, you are not an American. You are not a patriot. You are in the pocket of probably the Queen, or at least some globalists who, in fact, probably pay you.
Wasn't he appointed to the Knights of Malta?
I believe
back in 2005,
yes.
Before he became,
yeah,
before he was at some point during his reign.
The largest insider trading group in the world, yes, that would be our Chief Justice. And as we say, that then is what feeds his offshore account. There is no way that that man is taking that small of a pay without being paid under the table with that much power. Just not possible, folks. And so if you think any of those people on the Supreme Court are good, you'd have to demonstrate it to me, because I'm working off of the premise that any elected official that is in any significant position of power has an offshore account, and that's how they're being paid and manipulated, especially and then also through their election fraud and the election campaign.
No, he's a genius investor. In 2012, he declared that he was worth he had investments up to $6.5 million.
Off of a salary.
He's just a genius investor.
That someone selling dog food makes more than that. Yeah, he's a genius. He's got time, you see. He's got time. He's only on the Supreme Court. He has time for those investments. But he doesn't have any insider trading information.
This really pains me to talk about judges this way, because back in 2008, when we sued Facebook, I actually felt like the judicial system would do us right. And each time I got disappointed, they dropped down a notch in my esteem, to the point now where I think these guys are just all corrupt. They all know what's going on, and they have a rule of ethics that says if they know there's corruption in one of their courts, they have a duty to report it. And that's specifically what they're not doing. And so when they present the rules of professional conduct to us with all these beautiful sounding ethics rules, and I realize that they don't practice any of these, but expect us to believe that that's the way they operate, then we are truly living in an immoral justice system. Not just broken, immoral.
Yeah, and they're the monarchy, and we're still the indentured servants, because we are not landed gentry. We're not esquires. We're not lawyers. We haven't been called to the bar. We're not part of the Inns of Court. And we don't have titles, and I don't even have, a title like Supreme Court Chief Justice, which I think would be right up there underneath.
I call you Lord Gabriel sometimes.
Well, yeah, but I thought it was because you're saying Lord Gabriel instead of Lord Gabriel. Well,
Yeah.
Sir Baron, Lord President, and all that good stuff. And the more titles you get in Britain, sorry, folks, I love you Brits too, but the more titles you got, the more corrupt you are, period. Sorry. That's what my research has shown.
It appears that way.
Please show me somebody who isn't corrupt, who's been a member of Parliament, or is a lord or a sir or a baron or a queen or a king or whatever, and I'll be glad to retract my words. But I have a degree in British history, for heaven's sakes. So when I criticize the Brits, it's with a professional opinion. But anyway, going back, the Supreme Court is corrupt. They're the only supreme thing they are is supremely corrupt. Because why? We know what your decision is before you give it to us. Why do you even stay there? Just leave. And fairness, I haven't seen a fair decision come out of the Supreme Court. It's always a partisan issue. It always, just like the Kavanaugh fiasco, kangaroo court. Are any of those people going to go to jail who actually broke the law? How about Kamala Harris, who had the fake letter of the lady who now says that it was completely fake? Is she going to go to jail? No, of course not. There's going to be no judges anywhere who ever point out corruption in anything.
Let's not assume that. Let's see some things happen.
Well, Miss Ford needs to go to jail.
Get quite full.
Yeah, well, Miss Christine Ford needs to go to jail. And the other ones who came forward need to go to jail. And Michael Avenatti? Okay, really? Running for president when we know that you are corrupt? You've already been busted for being corrupt with Stormy Daniels, the fake CD with information on it. She never even met Trump. What a lie. That was David Brock paying her $385,000. And what's great is Trump is charging Stormy more than that for his lawyer fees for her fake suit against him. And Michael Avenatti, well, that just shows how corrupt things can be. He owes more taxes than just about anybody out there walking on the street. And yet, is anybody going to arrest him? Is anybody going to do anything? I don't know. But Michael, thank you. I know that as we look at AIM for Truth and we look at Americans for Innovation, oftentimes we see the raps on the judges. And you know what? It's really hard to find an honest judge. So I'm afraid I have a very jaded opinion about all of this. But we sure do thank you today for enlightening us about Chief No Justice John Roberts and the way that he was so criminally involved with Leaders versus Facebook, and the way that he became rich off of the demise of your company. So, John Roberts,
yes,
we're giving you one last chance. You better go with that writ of mandamus and do the right thing.